engine mounts. Storm clouds gather, lost count of the accounts. Black lives matter. Rubber slugs, tear gas, make crowds scatter. Civil disobedience, internet chatter. Cadavers in the streets underneath police. Everyday occurrence, ending up deceased. Perceived to be a threat, beast off a leash. Tolerance dismissed, no justice, no peace.
You're listening to Mobile Oasis with your host, Taj Tarik Bey. Exclusively on High Frequency Radio Network, the baddest radio network on the planet.
Islam, why they make them? Peace on earth and goodwill to all men. This is Mobile Oasis on High Frequency Radio. The High Frequency Radio call-in number is 424-222-5250. That is 424-222-5250. And I'm Taj Tarik Bey, your host for Mobile Oasis, and I'm honored to be here with you today on High Frequency Radio, a humanitarian and informative communications venue. I will be hosting this show for your honor, for your respect, and for your considerations from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. in the afternoon. This day or degree is Thursday, known in Moorish Latin as Jueves, being the 5th day of the week, and ruled by the planet Jupiter. The holy name for this degree, or Ilo, is Sakail. And as the schedule may allow, I trust to be with you on Thursdays to come. Recognizing the unity of life, we thank you and honor you for sharing your time with us, and trust that our sharing, will and communications will manifest as nurturing remedial dispensations, bringing forth some greater good and functionality. And as we appeal to the higher principles within ourselves to help as an ancillary in the great universal humanitarian movement, we trust that you will do the same, promoting and supporting the works needed and necessary in helping to uplift fallen humanity. And with that being said, we encourage you to bring the best that your heart has to offer. And let us sit down at the round table and with good intent get some work done. And we greet you in peace here on High Frequency Radio. I'd like to share with you some congressional documents. We have talked in the past about House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress in session, June the 5th of 1933, dealing with the U.S. bankruptcy. Keep in mind when that is brought up in any conversations or when any so-called operatives doing business as the United States of America, etc., it must be clearly understood by everyone that you're not speaking to persons of a country. You're speaking to persons of a private, for-profit, corporate entity distinguished from an alien to the legitimized republic as stated and as established via the American Constitution set at Article 4, Section 4. Now, concerning the bankruptcy of the United States, this is very important, and take some notes, etc., and do some research hereafter so that much of this information that's shared with you on High Frequency Radio makes more practical sense to you, and that the information that's shared can be more useful to you. And as far as reference points are concerned, you can back up your positions in relationship to your interfacings and your interchanging with these persons, these alien persons who have been acting as imposters in government and exercising authorities and powers absolutely not vested in them. Now, there are worse things that we can expect if we don't wake up and demand some accountability from those persons alleging to be public servants in government. Now, keep in mind, don't say the government, don't say the positive article, because they are not the government. Those persons who are operating in all of the corporate states across the United States are essentially enemies of the United States, and this is the basis upon which they've been operating and abusing the people. And I was appreciating the information that Brother Paul Savage shared with us earlier on his show. And keep in mind, the very actions and the attitudes displayed by these persons is indicative of their knowing that they are not only dishonorable, but they are actually criminal. And like Paul said, what we should be doing every time we interface with them is reporting the crimes committed by them, and not necessarily just arguing with them trying to get due process, because they're not about due process, they're not about law, they're about criminality and robbing the people, etc. So to expect anything positive from them is sort of like naive. Now, the fact of the matter is the United States did go bankrupt in 1933. Although that's really not the first time, we'll just deal with this in relationship to their documented records. And so the United States was declared by the President Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, by Executive Orders 6073. Write that down. These are the executive orders that were issued by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. 6073. Another one, 6102. Another one, 6111. And Executive Order 6260. And that was issued on March the 9th of 1933 under the Trading with the Enemy Act of October the 6th of 1917. Put it in context. When they unlawfully and with sound and organized conspired corruption transferred the powers of the Congress of the United States Republic to the Board of Governors of the private for-profit human trafficking order of the governors of the Federal Reserve, private corporation for human trafficking, and for printing counterfeit. This is a knowing act. It was not done without any misleading or misrepresented information. They knew exactly what they were doing. And this is one of the major foundations upon which they have been operating to the injury of the people on a consistent basis, and logically, because they are operating in a thorough corrupted order, there is no venue that they have structured for justice, because their operation is actually anti-justice. So it's in our interest, logically, to seek justice, understand their operation is to counter justice. Their operations is to counter the Republic's Constitution. And so when any processes or communications are taking place between the common people and these corporate persons doing business as the United States Corporation Company, entity, ETC, and its subordinate states of corporate entities distinguished from state republics, that must be always clear to everyone. Make it very clear in your mind that the state of Pennsylvania is not Pennsylvania Commonwealth as established under the American Constitution. There are two different venues, two different entities, etc. Pennsylvania Commonwealth has a legitimate constitution. State of Pennsylvania is a rogue order of criminals whose mission it is and was and continues to be to overthrow the Republican forms of government. This is why the barristers of England through the Bar Association have been consistently violating the people and constructing through symboliography, instruments and processes by which they artfully rob the people, and instead of serving the people as public servants, they've actually been trafficking the people. And this, whether you're looking at the marriage certificate set forth by the DAR, or the birth certificate bottomry instrument, or the original manufacturer's titles of origin that is leaned against all vehicles, etc., all conveyances, etc., cars, trucks, automobiles, motorcycles, etc. And it is upon these frauds that they've been creating what is called colorable ens legis, or colorable legislation, to continue to rob the people and to find the people in relationship to finances and their liberties, etc., for exercising rights that are essentially rooted in divine law and are essentially unalienable rights, etc. And so the operations of the U.S. corporation company, distinguished from the United States Republic, is a feudal order, the U.S. democracy order, distinguished from the allodial nature of the republic. They are actually opposites. And so when people are interfacing with these persons claiming to be government, understand that they are well aware that they're exercising or entertaining criminal operations at all times. One of the things that I think very often occurs with the common people is that they're not aware of that fact. This is, again, why we share information on high-frequency radio, to try to aid and assist people to come out from under the iron hand oppression of the pale-skinned nations of Europe under the guise of their U.S. democracy order and Inquisition operations under the doctrine which is used operatively to run all agencies, all subordinate agencies and agents and persons, etc. And they use their doctrine of discovery as a manual of operations. Now, because many of the people, particularly the Aboriginal, indigenous people of the land, many of them are not aware of that, they have a tendency to formulate in their minds false expectations, etc. I also want to make a comment on the ritual Constantinian sacrifices that they make on the streets with young Asiatic males whom they have branded black and Latinos, etc. Understand, one of the most expensive drugs that is shared amongst the hierarchy in the U.S. democracy order is an elixir which they make from the pineal gland, which they steal from the bodies of the young males, etc., that they sacrifice on the street. Also, they sell the organs, etc. And so when people look at these sacrifices of humans that they make on the street and assume that they're just oversights or mistakes, etc., understand that they get kickbacks for the organs, etc., and all of the policemen who are really members of the gang of New York, which by secret agreement has spread across the country, etc., and are actually contract enforcers for the private corporations. They are not lawmen. They are not enforcers of law. They're actually highwaymen, and these principles and facts are documented. And so the people must have a cognate comprehension and understanding of whom they're dealing with, and make no assumptions that these people are your friends. They are not. They are contract enforcers for private corporations, and part of their operations of murder on the street through their gangs of New York is the selling of organs, etc., and protected under their doctrine of discovery, which the Magi administrators of the human trafficking venues that they have been falsely calling courts, etc., are operative conspirators for the popes of Rome through and via their doctrine of discovery. This is the reason why there's rarely, very rarely, any processes by which persons who commit these heinous criminal acts against humanity, why they're not punished in any reasonable manner. And the people need to know that the administrators sitting behind the tribunals, which are not courts, they're private tribunals for profit. Also, for those who doubt what I just said, they should do some research on the Clearfield Doctrine to understand that these are private for-profit corporate entities and not government at all. And so that people don't develop or formulate in their mind that these people are in any manner, on any front, under any condition, legitimate. They are not. It's unfortunate, yes. It's criminal, yes. It's unfair, yes. Anti-justice, yes. But it's still, and in fact, what it is. And so they're operating on the Trading with the Enemy Act of October the 6th of 1917, which they enacted. That's in harmony with their establishment of converting the powers of the Congress to the governors of the Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve, etc., private corporate entity, etc. This is the foundation, understand, of their confidence in getting away with the criminal acts that they're committing on the street. And they're also counting on the fact that many and most of the so-called paid-off leaders will not expose that fact, which we just presented, to their alluring followers, etc. And most of them have or possess a 501c3 skull and bones agreement to get kickbacks from the corporate states, distinguished from the state's republic, ATC, in order to maintain misinformation and misconcepts amongst their alluring followers. And this is one of the major bases of frustration with the people, because they have one expectation and, of course, receive only injury, distress, destruction, stacking the jail, private for-profit jails, under penance, under the doctrine of discovery. And so it must be understood that the people are not dealing with legitimate government, and that must be always kept in mind in every process and every interchange and every interfacing that takes place between the Aboriginal people of the planet and of the land, America, Morocco, and the foreign for-profit occupying colonial Europeans who have been pretending to be legitimate government and exercising their doctrine of discovery. Now, with the U.S. Congress compromised, and they confirmed the bankruptcy on June the 5th of 1933, and thereupon they impaired all the obligations and considerations of contracts through their joint resolution to suspend the gold standard, which is rooted in the American Constitution, and to abrogate the gold clause on June the 5th of 1933. And, of course, as reference, you will see House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress, first session. Now, when the private for-profit tribunals and their personnel who are impersonating courts were called upon to rule on various of the provisions designed to implement and to complement Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Emergency Banking Relief Act of March the 9th, 1933, they were all found unconstitutional. And so what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did was go back to the courts and stack the courts with his chosen obsequious members of the bench or the Bar Association, and then sent many of the cases back through and reversed the rulings. And so under a color of law, they actually reversed the rulings that found their actions unconstitutional, and they did that under graft, under intimidation, under fraud processes, etc., proving themselves indeed to be enemies of the state. Now, House Joint Resolution 192, 48 Statute 112 was passed under a color of law by the U.S. Congress members on June the 5th of 1933. Now, that particular act committed by them impaired the obligations and the considerations of contracts and declared that the notes, the private for-profit commercial paper notes issued by the foreign for-profit Federal Reserve banks were legal tender for the payment of both public and private debts, and that the said payments in gold coin was against quote-unquote public policy. I repeat, they declared that the payment in gold coin, as required by the American Constitution, was against public policy. And in effect, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the compromised U.S. Congress, under executive orders and legislative fiat, nationalized the people's money, i.e. their gold coin. Now, nationalization under a color is a violation of the law of nations and a violation of existing public policy of Congress. As a case of reference, see Hilton versus Guyot. That's Hilton versus Guyot, Guyot, 159 U.S. 113, and that's a case of 1895. Now the gold coin that was confiscated, and they disguised it under alleged nationalized, was later used to purchase voting stockholder shares in the bank and the fund at $35 per ounce. At this point in time, fair market value. Now, a willing seller and buyer without compulsion lost any substantive meaning or substantial meaning. Now, moreover, all of the governors of the several states of the Union who were summoned to and were in Washington, District of Columbus, during the several days of this pre-planned economic fake emergency, the first phase of which was to nationalize under a color of law and to expropriate the people's money, i.e. to steal their gold coin on deposit in the bank. All this must be put in context that all of these persons are actually deputy knights for the Pope of Rome under their doctrine of discovery, and by virtue of them abrogating the gold clause, this also abrogated their obligations to the Treaty of Peace and Friendship superseding the Constitution, and of course would give them colorable grounds on maintaining the institutionalization of forced servitude and peonage, which is connotatively referred to as slavery, i.e. being a 14th Amendment person, corpse, converted to the living dead, etc. And this is where, through color of law, in 1868, they set forth the equality of person to the corpse for the corporation. And of course, they registered all conquered people, particularly people of Asiatic African descent, as Constantinian or quote-unquote Christian hegemony property under the 14th Amendment, registered in their corporate state venue of Delaware, etc. Now, keep in mind, they expropriated the people's money and their gold coins on deposit in the banks. So they stole the people's finances right from the banks. And keep in mind, one of the things that's harmonic with that action then is also harmonic with some of the political actions that they're committing against the people in these days, and that's called House Joint Resolution 2847. And do some research on that, too, because that's a misrepresentation, too, where they're also plotting, planning, and have been expropriating the people's deposit boxes and anything of value from the people, including stealing their funds, etc., to give some satisfaction to their private for-profit exercises in frauds in their interchanges with other countries and other persons, etc., i.e. the alleged debts that they've created under the frauds and are in fact trying to convert them on the people when actually their private for-profit debts distinguished from any true national debt. That must be very clear to everyone in order to have a proper concept of how to look at things when we're dealing with any operations dealing with the criminals that have taken over the United States Republic government and instilled their private for-profit U.S. democracy order under their doctrine of discovery, which is in fact what's going on. And it cannot be emphasized enough that when one is not aware of that fact, one has absolutely misconceptions as to what's going on. And so that must be cured from an informational perspective to all the people when we're analyzing any interchanges made with these organized criminals that are entrenched within offices that do not exist, that they're claiming have legitimate authority of operations. And this is, again, why it's important for people to study House Joint Resolution 192, 48 Statute 112, and also the Clearfield Doctrine of 1942, so that the concepts of how to look at these operations committed by them should be more clear in the minds of people, and that people do not make the mistake of calling such persons officers or officials, both of which they are not. And of course, when persons, natural persons, who are heirs to the estates, refer to these operatives as officer, they are inadvertently, by oral trust, giving them that position at that moment. And of course, knowing that the people are not aware of the corruption that's going on, they accept the offer of officer offered by the people and exercise powers not vested in them, and are absolutely operating under a color. Now, keep in mind that all of the governors, which are CEO of the several corporate states of the Union, who were summoned to and were in Washington, District of Columbia Territory area during the several days. And keep in mind that Washington, District of Columbia, is a separate sovereign state that they created for their personal selves, separate from the legitimate United States, in order to maintain and to exercise their corruption, to enforce the secret treaty of Verona, etc., and their doctrine of discovery, which is their guide, operatives, and manuals for operation of public policy. That must be understood at all times, and we must, unfortunately, remind ourselves of that continuously, because we have a tendency to forget that. Excuse me. Also, keep in mind, that pre-planned emergency, etc., relative to the gold coin going deposited on the banks, pledged the full faith and credit thereof, and to the aid of the national government, which they secretly overthrew, and formed various socialist committees, such as the Council of State Governments, quote unquote, Council of State Governments. And so, as you can see, even the governors of the states conspire and get together to misgovern the people. This must be understood. This is why they bury or distort any due process operations in the quote-unquote so-called states of agencies when people are seeking remedy for seeking due process to claim right of a state.